Hello there. Well, what most of us predicted about taxing electric vehicles going forwards is now in the pipeline. This was always going to happen. All those smug EV drivers will soon find themselves being heavily taxed in order to replace all that lost fuel duty as internal combustion engine cars, or ICE cars, become fewer and further between on our roads. EVs are already in the frame for vehicle excise duty from April 2025, remember? And the Telegraph is running with a report about a company called Arup being hired by the UK Department for Transport to look at how to deal with harmful emissions from electric vehicle brakes and tyres that are feared to be more harmful than those from ICE cars. And it seems the inevitable answer is to tax them more heavily and charge them per mile for driving on our roads. The demonisation of the EV, as I predicted it would, is now starting in earnest. Because they need an excuse to transfer the taxation from ICE cars onto EVs. There is even talk of transferring some of the present ICE tax burden onto the general taxpayer through income tax as we move forwards. Now many see Sadiq Khan's expanded ULEZ and its cameras as a precursor to a permanent pay-per-mile scheme once the vast majority of ICE cars are off the road. But despite his previous pronouncement that he was excited by the idea of having variable road use pricing schemes to charge people more during hours of congestion, he's now saying there will be no pay-per-mile while he's Mayor of London. So why are Transport for London looking for engineers to lead the way in introducing a new, more sophisticated type of road pricing? Anyway, it seems that Arup have advised that road pricing could be achieved by requiring all vehicles to carry and operate a tracking transponder, with direct debits taken directly out of drivers' bank accounts automatically at the end of the month. Cue new crime of cloning transponders. And the Transport Secretary Mark Harper has pointed to the Mayor of London's own website and Khan's 2030 scheme, telling LBC News he wants to roll out more road user charging schemes, pay-per-mile schemes across London. There are a whole bunch of jobs on that website, some of them paying up to £90,000 a year, to do pay-per-mile schemes in the future. But one supposes that if a plan has not yet been formalised, a politician can claim there is no plan. Well, not yet, anyway. The other problem, of course, is that there is major concern that there won't be enough electricity generated to enable the level of car use we have today. Therefore, there will be much fewer cars using the road. Less tax and pay-per-mile revenue collected, hence talk of bundling some road tax into income tax. Now, the government's Environment Agency has itself pledged to meet all climate goals by 2030 and has a plan for its own organisation. Well, it would, wouldn't it? And part of that plan is to reduce the number of lease cars it uses by 50%, from 4,000 to 2,000. Maybe that's what our whole private transport system is meant to mirror in the coming 7 years. And that's backed up by the sheer lack of movement on getting the grid, the electricity generation and EV charging up to a spec that would allow mass electric car ownership and use. In fact, it's almost like they want to strangle our personal energy usage in every possible way. If you remember, the UK Climate Change Committee has said that by the mid-2030s we'd need to be preheating our homes in the afternoon so as to avoid using electricity in the evening peak usage hours. Probably because there'll be a lack of capacity. It's all a mess. But don't think for a moment that this is isolated to the United Kingdom. I caught an interview by Siamak for California Insider on YouTube. where he asks leading commentator and member of the editorial board of the Southern California News Group, Susan Shelley, about the state of net zero in California. And everything she said could be said of the state of play in the UK, with the central point being that renewables in California, the third greenest state in the US according to WalletHub, renewables in California only provide about 30% of the energy used, at best. They've even delayed shutting down their last nuclear reactor for 3 years because they haven't got the capacity to replace it yet. And California electricity costs have more than doubled. And there's also not enough being done to put the right electricity infrastructure in place, while the carbon footprint of California is just 1% of the whole planet. And she was told by a California energy insider that there is a plan for demand response. And that meant reducing demand, meaning that most people will be using a lot less electricity. Further, they have a strategy for deploying that plan. A 4-word strategy called shape, shift, shed, shimmy. This entails basically shaping people's behaviour to shift the times and reduce the amount of electricity Californians use, while shedding load, possibly through blackouts, and then keep shimmying to somehow make it work. But what's worse is that the state apparatus can't, as I understand it by their own law, make any long-term contracts with coal, oil or gas companies. So it's not viable for a gas-generating company to step in short-term to fill the gap. Susan Shelley also pointed out that California legislated in the stupid belief that once they'd passed the net zero laws, the market would be able to instantly step in and make it so. And also that all she could see was less electricity for ordinary people at a much greater cost. So her view was that if you want to make a living in California, get making and selling candles. But those candles would also have to be environmentally friendly, wouldn't they? Does all that sound familiar? Now, if the third most net zero compliant state in the US is in this particular situation, what of the rest of the good old USA? Oh, and by the way, California has a GDP that is slightly larger than that of the UK. Ours is $3.1 trillion, California $3.6 trillion. And as far as I can tell, the net zero situation doesn't look any better in Europe either. All those promises that were made at all those eco-COP meetings, all those net zero laws passed on the back of them, building up the debt and problems for the taxpayer and consumer, and all relying on making law that would somehow change the scientific principles of electricity generation while making it cheaper, but achieving the exact opposite. But these seeming flaws in thinking, legislation and delivery appear to be replicated across the Western world, as well as the open borders phenomena. And only a fool could believe that is a mere coincidence. And on top of all of that, we now have a new variant. And Joe Biden has already declared that the US will cook up a whole new batch of juice to deal with it, for everyone over the age of 6 months, adding, interestingly, that this is one batch that would work. What is he saying? And predictably, the UK is rushing its winter programme forwards too. Looks like the nudging towards the fear and confusion is ramping up.